Fantastic. So our next speaker is Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, who was most recently the World Health Organization's chief scientist, and before that, the Deputy Director General for Programs. Returning to India, she took over as chairman of the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation in February 2023, pertinent to, of course, in addition to the enormous impact that air quality has on public health, she is also the co-chair of Our Common Air, a new initiative started by the Clean Air Fund and CEW. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan is a pediatrician and a globally recognized researcher on tuberculosis and HIV. And she brings with her 40 years of experience in clinical care and research, and has worked throughout her career to translate research into impactful programs. Dr. Swaminathan was Secretary to the Government of India for Health Research and Director General of the ICMR from 2015 to 2017. In that position, she focused on bringing science and evidence into health policymaking and building research capacity in Indian medical schools and forging South-South partnerships in health sciences. She also served as coordinator of the UNICEF, UNDP, World Bank, WHO Special Program for Research and Training in Tropical Diseases in Geneva. As the WHO's inaugural chief scientist, Dr. Swaminathan built the science division with a focus on research, quality assurance of norms and standards, and digital health. She played a key role during the pandemic in coordinating scientific efforts at the WHO, as well as in setting up COVAX with a focus on equitable vaccine distribution to low and middle income countries. We are really honored to have Dr. Swaminathan joining us today. And over to you, Dr. Swaminathan.
Thank you very much. Are you able to hear me and see me all right?
Yes, please.
Okay. So thank you so much, and apologies for not being there in person. But I'm sharing a few thoughts with you today on on air quality management in India and what the future looks like. And I hope that you can see the slides. I'm going to try and put it on a slideshow mode now.
Perfect.
Is it visible? All right. Okay. Thank you so much. So, of course, I don't need to tell this audience about the fact that air pollution is one of the major challenges, but for me, it's a major threat to our health. And in fact, I'll show you some data that really proves beyond doubt that it contributes to a significant amount of our morbidity as well as our mortality. Of course, we know about short-lived climate pollutants or super pollutants. So apart from PM 2.5 and PM 10, we know that these short-lived climate pollutants like black carbon, methane, ozone, hydrofluorocarbons, etc., their potential, to harm the environment and warm the atmosphere is even more than CO2. And here, you can see what black carbon is doing in terms of contributing towards chronic respiratory illness, lung cancer, emphysema, pneumonia, asthma, heart disease, low birth weight, and tropospheric ozone, which a lot of people do not appreciate because most people are thinking of the atmospheric ozone also contributing to many of these cardiovascular and respiratory illnesses. And overall, according to the WHO, air pollution is associated with 7 million premature deaths annually, globally, of course. About half of it is due to indoor air pollution and the rest is due to ambient air pollution. Now, if we look at the major global threats to life expectancy, as you know, the GBD, Global Burden of Disease, looks annually at both risk factors and determinants as well as at the prevalence of major health disorders. And if we look at just these 5 countries or 4 countries in South Asia, and we look at India here, then the PM 2.5 actually is the one that contributes to the maximum number of life years lost, more than high systolic blood pressure or hypertension, tobacco, and child and maternal malnutrition. And of course, number 2 here is cardiovascular disease, which itself is due to a number of other risk factors. In terms of reducing our life expectancy globally, PM 2.5 is contributing to about 2.3 years of life lost. Just below that is tobacco. So in fact, there's so much attention on tobacco and global frameworks for control, etc., but not the same level of attention has been paid to PM 2.5, and certainly not the same level of commitments have been made. Now, for countries like India and many countries in South Asia and Africa, the combined effects of heat and air pollution are even deadlier when they are combined. And there was a study done by the University of Southern California where they looked at 1.5 million deaths between 2014 and 20 and found that air pollution contributed to about 5%, high temperatures to 6%. But if you combine the two on the same day, if you have both high PM 2.5 and very high temperatures, then you'll find that it's about 3 times higher. The risk of death is 3 times higher when you combine both of these risk factors. Now, again, I don't need to tell this audience about how exactly air pollution is impacting. It is the largest environmental threat to health. Now, 2.4 billion people are still exposed to dangerous levels of household air pollution because of solid biomass use, and this contributes to 7 million premature deaths annually, of which about a little over 500,000 are children under 5 years of age, and global average life expectancy is shortened by 2.2 or 2.3 years. But in India, it is shortened almost more than that, and in North India by about 5 years. Now, of course, there's a huge economic impact as well, which again, people don't realize. Look at the amount, trillions of dollars in annual global health costs, 6% reduction in global GDP, so many billion work days lost, and household air pollution causes the loss of 86 million healthy life years, particularly women from low and middle income countries. So women are losing so many years of life, because of exposure to household air pollution. And as I mentioned, in India, the PM 2.5 is slashing an average 5 years of our lifespan. And almost 70% of the population lives in areas that exceed the country's own national air quality standards of 40 micrograms per cubic mm, which is much higher than the WHO cutoff of 5 micrograms per cubic mm. And the risks to women are higher. We've just done a study that we submitted to the Ministry of Women and Child Development, where we showed the disproportionate impacts on health of women and children because of various climatic hazards, but we focused a lot on air pollution. Again, children are more affected. Why? For many reasons. One, their lungs are smaller, so they are breathing faster. Secondly, they are shorter, so they're closer to the ground, and therefore they tend to get even more of the pollutants, which tend to settle down. And thirdly, they have developing organs. And so, PM 2.5 actually goes through is able to get into the bloodstream, go, to the brain and other organs, and therefore has been associated with cognitive effects in addition to, respiratory and cardiovascular effects. And children who are malnourished, there we find that the neurotoxic effects of air pollution are even greater. And women during pregnancy, when they are exposed, there is now data from India, from Faridabad, the Translational Health Science Institute, that women who are exposed to heat and air pollution, especially in the first and third trimester, have a higher risk of preterm births and small for gestational age babies. Again, we've talked about women being impacted, and still in India and also in many other developing countries, women are using solid biomass despite all the efforts that have been made to give them clean energy for cooking. And in fact, a study showed that the biomass cooking resulted in 10 to 20 times higher indoor air pollutants than WHO norms. This was done by Kalpana Balakrishnan. But also studies done in Delhi have shown that women's average exposure to high levels of black carbon, this is women who were at home mostly, was as much as auto rickshaw passengers in going around outdoor, exposed to the ambient air pollution in Delhi, resulting in a high systolic blood pressure. So I want to shift to what this commission that I'm part of is doing. It's called our Common Air. It's a commission to catalyze global collective action on clean air. Independent commission was convened in 2023 jointly by CEW based in Delhi and the Clean Air Fund based in London. And the aims were really basically to create conditions for faster, more effective action, reaffirming the links between addressing climate change, health, and economic development, accelerating cost-effective opportunities to phase down dependence on fossil fuels, encouraging governments to make clean air a fundamental a priority, and to push for greater financial support, both from public and private sources. So here are the commissioners. I'm very privileged to co-chair this with the Right Honourable Helen Clark, previous Prime Minister of New Zealand. And you can see we have commissioners from around the world, and they're all, experts and top scientists from different countries. So essentially, we started really with, as I said, conceptualization and design in early 2023. There were several virtual meetings that we held through last year, and then we met in Bellagio early this year to finalize some of the papers and launched our Common Air at the World Bank spring meetings with several papers. There was a call to action, there was an economics paper, a finance paper, and a lot of social media activity. And since then, we have been socializing the concepts that we have, and we have 4 papers now. The last one is going to come out next week, and it's on really accountability mechanisms and monitoring. How do we get countries to commit? Just like we have nationally determined contributions for climate, we need to have these kind of commitments made to reducing key pollutants. PM 2.5 is a very critical one, but as I mentioned, the other super pollutants are also equally important. So the papers that were finalized in Bellagio and published were really talking about clean air as an asset. We're always talking about air pollution as a problem, but here this paper is really about strengthening the economic case for action on clean air and saying, if you invest this much in cleaning up the air, this is the amount of returns on that investment that you're going to get. And it's very positive, because we know air pollution not just bad for our health, but it's also bad for agriculture, because it reduces the sunlight that's reaching the crops, and it's bad for our economy, or any country's economy, because it deters people from coming and living or visiting those places. So we made financing for clean air explicit, measurable, innovative, and additional, and as both from private and public sector. And the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and growingly more development banks are coming on board and creating their own funding mechanisms. And then there was a call to action that came out, Clean Air, a call to action with key recommendations. And now we will have these 2 more papers that have come out, one on solutions and the other one which is accountability, or really about the monitoring mechanisms, which will come out on September 7th. And of course, we continue to engage at the key political moments. So our key recommendations really are to value clean air as an asset, including an economic asset. How do we finance this transition? And there are lots of synergies here between the SDGs and the climate commitments. And if we're smart about it, we should be able to really galvanize much more action through financing this transition. We need to set clean air targets. Very few countries actually have clean air targets, and we need to align these with WHO. In fact, the majority of countries in the world are not aligned with WHO, which, as you know, reduced the target from 10 to 5 a few years ago. And how do we work collaboratively? How do we have a global collaboration that is tracking progress towards a common goal? In fact, a large number of countries don't even have a single monitor to measure air pollution. So one of the goals is, how do we make these available? How do we finance it? And are there other ways, like countries which don't have on-the-ground monitoring systems, can we use satellite or other ways at least to track and progressively move towards improving air quality? Work together to achieve solutions that benefit all, and commit to urgent action on short-lived climate pollutants. So these were the 5 key recommendations that came out, and a call to action really for governments, civil society, partners, financing agencies, etc. And then just to go into a little more detail here, just for the next couple of minutes, the key recommendations from the economics paper, which as I mentioned, talks about clean air as an asset. Here are some recommendations for global and regional development banks as to how they should actually incorporate economic impact analysis into their processes, come up with the economic benefits of air pollution reduction, including air pollution, talking to countries saying, please include it in your country strategies, and produce case studies regionally, which can give examples to other countries. Researchers need to produce more studies about the economic impact of air pollution on different sectors, produce data about the human scale economic impact, form a coalition to produce a biennial economic case for clean air action report, and publish that methodology, and also produce country and city reports that show economic benefits and costs related to specific interventions. I think these are very important because ultimately it is economics that drives policy and strategy and change. Do a number of things, again, around analyses, around supporting research and producing case studies of countries that have done well. And insurance firms can start incorporating air pollution-related health costs in risk assessment so that equitable public health interventions can be appropriately estimated and designed. Then we have some key recommendations from the finance paper, which talks about why and how to invest in clean air. And this has seen some traction, as I mentioned, with several of the development banks. So we've talked about adopting a strong, agreed universal system of metrics, ensuring air quality impacts are encouraged, tracked, and publicized across investments. Specific associated measures could include adding air quality objectives to sectoral finance initiatives, for example, for buildings, transport, or infrastructure, and creating dedicated pillars or programs for air quality in financing envelopes. And last year, in fact, the MEGA program of the World Bank set aside $1 billion as a financing envelope, and then $4 billion additional dollars for air quality through the World Bank. So if every bank does that, we should be able to be in much better position. The wider funding community, including governments and philanthropy, must leverage and integrate additional financial and capacity building support and build pathways to channel funds to evidence-based clean air action. All stakeholders, including government board members, civil society creditors, and press development banks and national authorities to work together to extend financing, because cities need financing, local governments, state authorities. So very often you may have a national strategy and a plan, but really moving financing into the right direction is going to be important. And climate finance providers, in fact, it's less than 1% of international development financing today that goes to clean air. And so this is also going to be important because we need to build resilience and reduce risk. And then finally, here we have the key recommendations, from the finance paper again. What can philanthropy do? I think increasingly philanthropy has a big role to play, and they can do much more for air pollution, including investing in low-cost monitoring, research, evidence synthesis, as well as working with the broader community and, generally increasing the advocacy. Private sector companies, of course, must accept the responsibility to monitor, report, and reduce corporate air pollution and invest in clean air solutions, including energy transition, and champion action on air pollution. Government regulators, again, an important role for agencies and ministries that must ensure that the true costs of imposing air pollution on economies are measured, evaluated, accounted for, and borne by polluters through a responsible regulatory regime that encourages transparency and cleaner business practices. And then for smaller dispersed sources such as farmers, households, and small enterprises, we need to provide them the technical and financial support and guidance needed to help them switch to less emitting technology. So again, India is doing a lot of that, actually moving financing into this kind of clean energy transition. And then participants in carbon accounting must include air quality consideration in the planning, and national governments must redirect their current fossil fuel enabling subsidies, because unfortunately, if you look around the world globally, I think it's something like 7 trillion in subsidies still going towards fossil fuel subsidies, and therefore that really needs to change. developing national and subnational plans and targets to tackle air pollution. Again, we need to, I don't need to talk to this audience about the benefits of reducing short-lived climate pollutants. Not only will it avoid warming and protect our remaining glaciers, reducing sea level rise, etc., but it's going to have an impact both on health as well as on agriculture and prevent the climate tipping points, those that are left actually. So we need to think about these as well as PM 2.5 and PM 10. So I encourage you all to, take a look at these papers that have been produced by the Common Air, our Common Air Commission. We've had, as I said, presence at a number of these events through the year. We'll be at COP29 in Baku and at the World Bank spring meetings. We've done a lot of, tried to do as much advocacy as possible. But essentially, ultimately, we believe that, there is a clear economic case, apart from all of the benefits on health, just the economy itself, we can make a very strong case for people to come together and act. And there are good examples from around the world we've seen where cities and countries have been able to reduce in a couple of decades significant impact on air pollution. And in fact, cities like London have shown that the moment you reduce the particulate matter, you also immediately start seeing a reduction in cardiovascular admissions and deaths in the hospitals. So I think there's no need for any further arguments to be made. It's a question of how do we come together and get action on this very, very important topic. And I thank the organizers for bringing attention to this, continuing to focus on this important topic. And I would like to extend my full support to any further action that may come out of this convening. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Swaminathan. If you have time for one quick question, I know that you have to leave shortly.
Yes.
But I mean, given your vast experience in not just in air pollution, but also public health, generally speaking. So I mean, one of the questions that came up was, government officials in India are often faced with a multiplicity of risk factors. Like they have to deal with, say, dengue outbreaks or floods or, of course, air pollution. And so was that like a prioritization, or is there, do we focus on all fronts at once, or what would be your message to them?
So, I think that, we can't trade off one against the other. I think we have to set our priorities right. And for me, if public health is a priority, then we need to look at our burden of disease. We've got enough data on what our burden is, what are the risk factors and determinants which are contributing to poor health in India. And that may vary slightly by region, but overall we know what the top 3 risk factors are. So we just need to address those. I think that's the logical way to proceed. Okay, so excuse me, I do have to leave now, but I'd love to catch up again later and maybe think about how we can work together.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Swaminathan. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Great. And thank you all. That was a wonderful talk. And as a follow-up to that, one of the, some of the evidence base that Dr. Swaminathan cited is actually generated by Dr. Kalpana Balakrishnan, our next speaker. So Dr. Balakrishnan obtained her doctoral degree in biophysics and subsequent postdoctoral training in environmental health engineering, both at Johns Hopkins University, Baltimore, USA. Her fields of specialization include occupational and environmental health risk assessment, exposure assessment, industrial hygiene, and industrial toxicology. She is the head of the Department of Environmental Health Engineering at Sri Ramchandra University in Chennai, not Chennai, it's Porur, India. In Chennai? Okay. Her responsibilities include coordination of all activities of the department with special emphasis on management of extramural grants, execution of all major research projects, industrial consultancy, and administration of academic and short-term training. She is a world-renowned international expert in environmental health and serves many reputed organizations, including the World Health Organization, the World Bank, the Indian Council for Medical Research, and the Tamil Nadu State Pollution Control Board in multiple technical capacities. Invite her to come up and give the next talk. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Subbu, for that very generous introduction. I am so pleased to be here. This is my first time at the ICAS Summit, and in the past, perhaps have shied away from being at the ICAS Summit because my own area of work has been largely focused on a source of air pollution that has not been the focus of discussion at most clean air summits nationally, and many senior colleagues here, Dr. Beg and others who have been involved in this national clean air program efforts have struggled to bring this issue into attention. So if I might seek your kind indulgence in taking a different pitch in terms of where our priorities might lie for action. And this is not the only pitch, of course, but to sort of make a case for a pitch that is not made often enough. And Dr. Soumya gave a very nice description of where we have to be sort of heading in terms of how to bring the case for action. But how do you sort of prioritize, even within air pollution, which sources to act on first in a particular geography, whether it is India or a state in India, as it might be the case. So I titled my talk as Creating Healthy Breathing Spaces to emphasize one point about the seamlessness with which we have to act. We can't compartmentalize geographies because we only have one pair of lungs as we transect different geographical boundaries to keep experiencing these exposures. And the second thing I wanted to sort of look at, I think Soumya also made this case, there will never be no gaps in evidence. There will always be gaps in evidence for action. But do we have evidence for closing some of those gaps? I think there is a different paradigm shift that we need to be sort of making in. And the pictures, okay, there you go. And the pictures, that you saw tell the story that in India, for example, we have to be sort of really focusing on both household and ambient air pollution in the same breath. And the other brief point that I wanted to make in terms of where we run into a roadblock for actions when we think about interventions is the self-explanatory circle of evidence that all of us trained as epidemiologists or air quality action experts are well trained while we are in graduate school or when we start doing some of these projects. But I think somewhere we sort of really get caught up in sort of, having to be defensible in terms of the evidence we have for adverse effects of exposures. And so to this point, we are constantly beating the same horse dead in terms of how much more evidence do you need in terms of adverse effects of exposures compared to focusing our energy on what might be the beneficial effects of interventions. And therefore, focusing much more on, I suppose this is the pointer, there are the exposure response relationship and the understanding we have of that will really allow us to directly move to actions without sort of dwelling on the numbers of deaths and disability-adjusted life years, which often draws us into a contention. How big is the impact? How uncertain is the impact? As opposed to sort of the strength of the association that is fundamental in understanding the association between the exposure and the health effect. And therefore, I want to sort of make a case for what do we already know? Most of us in the room know. I don't have to preach to the choir. But I think it's important to revisit some of the things that are not often shared to address the skepticism. I don't have to say anything, We know air pollution is associated with health effects, and in the most recent update of the WHO air quality guidelines, we have several systematic reviews that sums up this evidence from all over the world that includes many low and middle income countries, unlike in the previous iterations where this evidence, including from India, was not able to be included. Number two, if we accept the WHO air quality guidelines and we accept the national ambient air quality standards, we shouldn't be sort of re-questioning where is the effect for association of air pollution health effects. WHO air quality guidelines form the basis for our national ambient air quality standards and also the most recent revision that is going to be mandated. And not only for ambient air quality, we also have WHO air quality guidelines for household fuel combustion. I think it was Kaushik or somebody who mentioned yesterday that most people are not aware that there is a whole guideline on household fuel combustion that is not talked about as much as the WHO air quality guidelines for ambient air quality. But most importantly, not only the AQGs provide the guideline values, but they provide the interim target guidelines. That has been the basis for many LMICs being able to adopt the interim target guidelines as their national guidelines. And therefore, they provide already, if you are moving your interventions going down the ladder through the interim target guidelines, that is the best possible strategy that you can actually do to improve health. And if any intervention gets you from IT1 to IT4, then you know that you're already on the path to improve health. But what do we find so difficult to accept when we already have a legislative framework that is premised on health, that is premised on the guidelines that is internationally accepted, is this large numbers of health impact. And I think in the circle of evidence I had sort of said that when we talk about impact, you get people sensitive, you get people doubting the methods. I'm sure Sharad and many others who have spent a week with you and Josh who can sort of really explain the nitty-gritty details of the models like many of us do, always don't, we are not able to sort of communicate to enough people how straightforward and how transparently these methods are now available for everybody to replicate it. We just don't have enough capacities. And so you end up, disputing the air pollution attributable burden. How could India be responsible for so many disability adjusted? Out of the 86 million globally, 27 million are in India, that, just attributable to ambient air pollution, and 33 million from household air pollution. Large numbers stun you, paralyze you in terms of not accepting this large burden. The second thing also that Soumya mentioned, how could household air pollution be competing with high blood pressure or low birth weight, where we have a patient in a doctor's clinic where we are easily able to explain the patient. If you have a low birth weight child, then you should sort of really focus on getting your nutrition right. But we are not able to do that for household air pollution in the same breath, mainly because the fundamental epidemiological principles of the individual risk versus the population risk, population attributable burden versus the individual patient risk is very, very different. So the medical community has a very difficult time accepting, embracing, and explaining it. And what can you do at the individual level for a risk factor that you don't have a behavioral solution for that can do that? And the last part of my talk, I want to sort of say, make a case for why should we start accepting? We find it difficult to accept, but why should we begin to accept? Mostly because if this is, one of our very, very fond mentors, many of you in the room will remember Professor Kirk-Smith at University of California, Berkeley. He used to often say this: instead of not in my backyard, most policymakers in air pollution want everything in my backyard. So you really need to sort of convince the action case by saying that how much of this evidence is also available locally for you to sort of buy into this evidence. And I'm not going to, please don't look at any of the data that is cited here in publications, because in the interest of time, but just the headlines. If you're doubting that models that went into the GBD assessments somehow are not ground truthed enough in terms of understanding how much exposures men receive, women receive, children receive, pregnant women receive. We have at least 24 studies. This is just one study from Andhra Pradesh that's been published, and we know how, when, where, what happens in terms of exposures that corroborate the global models. And if regulatory monitors, should be trusted more than the satellite-based estimates, we now have data that sort of really show extraordinary correlation with the regulatory network. And this is the same thing that is happening for low-cost sensors now that is already happened for AOD-based measurements. I'm sure you had lots of presentations that sort of made the same case for why well-done measurements and well-done models always agree. But if it's a poorly done model and a poorly done measurement, you are never going to, but we have enough of data sources to corroborate that. And that at the state level, we have very good estimates. This is the last iteration of GBD that we did, led by Indian Council of Medical Researchers, led by Indian investigators, but now it's going to be repeated again. Household was actually smaller than ambient air pollution last time when we did it in 2017, but we are now looking at household being larger than ambient. So you can't wish away household air pollution. If you're somehow thinking that development has already started to take care of it and we are on a trajectory downward, no, we are not yet on the trajectory downward. Number 3 on this point, that we just don't know enough. I mean, we not only know enough about urban, peri-urban settings where there's plentiful of sensors, plentiful of measurements. We now know about personal exposures in rural communities that are primarily reliant on household solid cook fuel use, results from the HAPPEN trial that have been also published, and in partnership with multiple other country assessments. So it's not just India, but sort of coordinated protocols, and a similar other study that the Pure Air Network published also corroborate the same information. India is no different from all the other countries wherein these assessments have been done using the same sets of protocols. And here are some long-term personal exposures for multiple air pollutants, not just PM2.5, black carbon, carbon monoxide, and many air toxics. And another reason why we should start accepting is because now we have exposure response information, as I mentioned, not for cardiovascular mortality that require the long-term cohorts, although even that is beginning to come in, but for every other health impact of national relevance in longitudinal rural urban cohorts. I was telling Subbu that there are at least 35 or so publications from India-based rural urban cohorts that have longitudinally measured all these outcomes and have quantitative exposure response relationships. Here are some relationships for birth weight from the HAPPEN trial for multiple pollutants. Here are some results from the CARS cohort, the Public Health Foundation of India recently published for blood pressure and hypertension. And here are some, studies that have really looked at modeled estimates of air pollution exposures, together with demographic surveillance data. And here is the most recent study that was disputed in the parliament on, where is the data that shows the association, because this was the results of the time series studies in 10 cities of India has been a phenomenal breakthrough. Dr. Beg will recollect how difficult we found it to do these multi-centric assessments. And this study, the 10-city study from India is exactly the same as the 400-city from China, the 200-city from Korea, and the NMAPs from the US several decades ago. So I think, to sort of really look at now going back and asking, for one, many of us are too old to be actually even having this argument anymore in terms of how do we synthesize the evidence. So we are really looking to all those of you who are on the other side of the table. We need thoda dum chahiye, we are losing the dum from our side. So what do we do next? I want to just stop here within the next 2 minutes saying that out of all the sectors in National Clean Air Program, it's great that because of efforts, I would say I really want to credit and remember the contributions of Professor Kirk-Smith, but for his engagement with MOPNG and the National Clean Air Program, we would not have gotten clean cooking as a sectoral intervention. And this is, of course, tribute to Panwar is here from many years of our work in Terry, I think 30 years ago. This is work, but why do we want to sort of focus on household air pollution? First of all, NCAP is very city-centric, non-attainment-centric in cities. Cities contribute less than 20% to the overall state emissions wherever they have been assessed. And this is a publication from Chandra Venkatraman to sort of make the case that you cannot do a National Clean Air Program by just focusing on cities. Next, in terms of, if you look at regions of the country where you are in the 80 to 140 microgram range, or the 40 to 80 microgram range, or the 0 to 40 microgram range, clear gradient throughout the country, in all these regions of air quality, household emissions predominate. Everywhere it is between 20 to 40%. And we were just having a discussion with Josh. If you look at all the low-cost sensor network that is data that is coming up, you're almost seeing cities being cleaner than the surrounding villages. And this is happening throughout the country where the household sources predominate. So there is a case for action on household air pollution even in Tamil Nadu, which sort of says, okay, it's a UP problem. No, it is also a Tamil Nadu problem. If you sort of really look at, am I moving? Can I move to the next slide? There you go. If any of you have seen this, I don't think you need any math. Does anybody want to argue about why we should act on this? Please tell me honestly and ethically. I don't think we need any math here. And how do we sort of really make a case for this? These inequities not just are, when you are young or when you are throughout your life. This is an exacerbation of health inequity throughout the life course. Household air pollution is something that not just, where do I point in order to move? There you go. And, we have an intervention. We have a government program. We have an investment by a government program that has already, given 50% of the cost needed in order for people to transition into LPG. And LPG, without belaboring, I will get a chance to describe some of these slides tomorrow, but the Happen trial essentially proved that if you give LPG to poor rural women for free for as long as 2 years, then there is no question of the rural women switching to biomass and being enabled to achieve an exposure reduction under the WHO interim target guideline. So it is not about women not being willing, the household not being willing. The barrier is simply put economic. period. That is what has been our conclusion from the HAPPEN trial. The trial may have had, negative findings in terms of sort of really looking at the health benefits from a short-term LPG intervention. But I would like to ask this audience this question. Did we get clean transportation based on RCTs? Did we get clean power based on RCTs? So why should household air pollution community get clean energy based on RCTs? It is not easy, it is not short-term, it is not conclusive, it is not a confined patient whom you give a placebo and ask them to comply where you can monitor. We are not going to do this real-time. So creating seamless, healthy breathing spaces seem like an impractical dream, but I think it is a feasible reality if we are just willing to be this. Alice in Wonderland, I hope. Curious, bold, resilient, patient, determined. I think we are all of this. We just need to sort of bring ourselves to revisit a neglected underdevelopment issue that can become the champion flagship card for the National Clean Air Program. And which better organization than CSTEP to champion this cause? So thank you for indulging me. I have wonderful colleagues here, all the way, Sharad, Santosh, Josh, Faye, Dan, many others in the room, Panva, grateful acknowledgements, and Ajay Pilarisetti and many others at UC Berkeley. Maria is here too, and Suresh Daniala, who too has been a big partner for you. Thank you again so much for indulging me with this opportunity to share my thoughts. Hope to do more on household air pollution tomorrow.
Thank you for that wonderful talk. That was amazing. That is fantastic. Thank you. And yeah, just as Dr. Kalpana said, she's also speaking tomorrow at the last session on household air pollution. We saved the best for the last, right? But we have time for a few questions. If you raise your hands, someone will come to you with a mic. Please introduce yourself and ask preferably a short question. Santosh?
Thanks so much, Kalpana. I was curious to hear more about what was the main driver for the update with household air pollution diaries sort of being larger than ambient diaries in the latest iteration. What changed? What are the main updates?
The proportion of people reliant on solid fuels is decreasing, of course, but it is offset by increase in population exposed. It's just pure population growth. And therefore, this catching up is going to delay our household air pollution burden being reduced substantially, because this population is just, is not growing any smaller, not at least at the rates. And GBD, and also the other important thing was the number of health endpoints that are being included in the burden for both household and ambient are increasing. So both are going to, and if you are going to have an outcome like low birth weight or perinatal outcomes, it is obviously going to include a lot of children who are exposed. Sometimes, it is not easy to compare the previous iteration with this iteration in terms of absolute numbers, but it's important to keep in mind that this is not going down, repeated, because the methods change and the types of models change a little bit, but the primary driver is that the proportion of people who are reliant on solid fuels is not decreasing at a rate where we can expect to gain public health benefits without intervening it in the short term or for the next 20-30 years.
Great, thank you. Actually, the one thing that kind of struck out at me was, your HAPPEN trial was in multiple countries across the world. And one of the sort of criticisms was, well, these studies have not been done in India, or Indians are somehow different. But I mean, the studies have been done in India, and studies have been done similarly in other parts of the world, and the effects are all the same. I mean, at the end, I mean, you're all human beings. If we all breathe the same, sooty air, then it's going to affect our bodies similarly, and now we actually have the data to show that. So that is fantastic as well. Nirav, do you have a question?
Hi, Professor Kalpana. Thanks for the wonderful talk. I just had one question. You said that we would like to move from solid fuel to LPG, but do you think we can skip the LPG and move to something more greener, like solar-based solution or something? Because the logistics becomes problem, and you're still transporting LPG from some place where it is filled and then to the households. That also has its own carbon footprint. So.
Please don't mistake me if I answer this question in a non-scientific way. Please let us ask ourselves this question. You and I have LPG now, today. Solar is not here for us. You think solar is going to get to the rural communities any sooner than it gets to us? Another 30 years. It will get. Of course we can leapfrog. It is an ethical question. What is good for us should be good for that rural poor woman. Who's going to be their champion? I don't want to sound like I'm not a, activist, but the science argues for this. That's the question that we want. Of course we can leapfrog. So LPG is, if you have one case for fossil fuel, can this be this case? I'm not saying it has to be, but we don't have any near-term solution. So let this be an interim solution till we all transition away from fossil fuels to renewables.
Yeah, great. And actually, that's actually a good reminder, because I remember that growing up in Bombay, my mom was cooking with kerosene. I mean, she grew up cooking with cow dung, then she moved to Bombay, started cooking with kerosene. In the 80s, we got LPG. And now if you have PMUI for a lot of rural areas, it's only happening in 2015 or later. So it's like 30 years, you're right. And I mean, yes, sure, we have solar stoves now, but they're still prototypes. So, but LPG is available now. Let's start doing as much as we can. That's perfect. Dr. Baig, you had a question?
Kalpana, it was wonderful overview. So that's what. I do not have a question. Well, I cannot ask you the question, but then I have some kind of your thought-provoking feedback that all we know, looking at the scenario, that kind of a health impact, government is in denial, whereas we are in the emergency in terms of a mortality, morbidity, impact from that point of view. What do you feel that looking at the scenario, what to government or the policy makers you would like, your thoughts, you would like to suggest to accelerate our efforts in this direction, which can balance antagonization and the scientific and benefit to the society?
I wish I knew, Dr. Baig. I'll retire tomorrow. Please tell me if I knew how to really mobilize everybody to do this convincing. And we look to the US. I know, other developed countries. Nowhere I think this task was easy of mobilizing clean air action initiatives. So I think we have to sort of really be sobered about the ability of people like us in these rooms and the limited power we have to sort of really influence decision making. I think Soumya is a great champion for us, where we can sort of really use these voices. It has to be one insufficient strength. We are still too few who understand the science. It has to be a significant number of us, and that's why I'm pleading to philanthropies. Let's get today, I'm sure in a week's time, more people knew about how to do emission inventories than in the last 10 years because of the capacity building that you have invested on. More people know about low-cost sensors than ever before, but this is still too small compared to what it would take to, and I have to be honest, policy making is not an easy job, and I don't know enough about all of that. But I do know that if we all come together on the science, and if we say that there is science is lacking somewhere, then we can certainly try to close the gaps. But we need to understand the science and just try and find more avenues. CEW is here, CSTEP is here. We have the call for the commission that Soumya mentioned about. but we still have too few, medical institutions or medical professionals engaged in this whole discourse in terms of really understanding the science.
Yeah,
So.
that's fantastic. And actually, I should mention that with thanks to support from the Bloomberg Philanthropies, we actually do organize capacity building workshops for government officials in the different non-attainment cities. We have done this in the cities in Karnataka. We've done this in Assam, for example. But clearly, I mean, the one thing that comes to mind is now we should actually start including a significant, component of the public health evidence generated in India, as well as the solutions that, starting with household air pollution, and make that as part of our capacity building efforts. Priya, you had a question?
Yeah, I just had a follow-up question to Dr. Beg's question and related to your talk, sort of specifically maybe looking at the household air pollution sector in India, and the point that you made that it's really economic. So do you think the next step now, or what's needed, is beyond the sort of subsidies to sort of provide free connections to certain targeted communities, or how would you kind of approach that?
Yeah, we recently published a paper on targeted subsidies. So it has to be sort of really targeted subsidies, and the subsidy structure it has to be obviously free for the most below poverty line households that we might be looking at. But we know enough about the tipping point. If you're sort of really halving the price, then more than 50% of the population can already transition. But there will, of course, be the last 10% that cannot transition without free. But the most important thing to know is that, the behavioral thing that people thought might be hardest to accomplish is not a thing. It is an economic thing. And therefore, we have to sort of really look at where would the money come from, who might we target subsidies. And Dr. Beg, again to your question on, I think it's the cost that sort of is mind-boggling, and that sort of prevents people from accepting. The benefit we are not able to document because it's long-term, and it takes time to sort of really appreciate the benefit, instantly. So more during our breaks.
Great, thank you so much. That is a wonderful session. Actually, Anshika, did you have a quick question? Quick.
Yeah, I think Dr. Kalpana already answered it. You had mentioned that if you give LPG for a 2-year period to women, they would transition to cleaner fuel. So I just wanted to ask that, is it like a question of affordability and accessibility, and not about the larger scheme of gender relations within the rural spectrum?
That is, mostly true. So I don't want to be naive in saying that the gender thing is not real, or that the household decision-making power is not thing. But by and large, it is this question of the analogy with mobile technology, or our analogy with facility births, or the analogy with vaccines. If the cost of the technology is brought to a point where people will just take it, I think India is in a position where pretty much all of India will take it. But the price has to be brought down. So the 2-year period, we were thinking, when the Happen trial happened, it was prior to COVID. And COVID hit, and then the price of LPG, world LPG prices fluctuated, and it went back up again. So much to be discussed, but the gender thing is far, far less than the affordability and the accessibility thing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And with that, let's give them a round of applause.